Imagine having, the money to fly your family to a pristine white sand beach in the Maldives.
Oh, that sounds incredible right about now.
Right, you could just spend 2 weeks sipping iced drinks, getting massages, and watching the sunset from a private cabana.
Sign me up.
Yeah, but what if instead of that, you choose to pack a single backpack, walk 500 kilometers down the shoulder of a Polish highway, breathe in semi-truck exhaust fumes, and sleep shoulder to shoulder on hard gymnasium floors?
Yeah, that's quite the pivot.
It is wild. Today, we are exploring why one modern, highly comfortable family intentionally chose the exhaust fumes over the cabana. Welcome to today's deep dive.
We spend the vast majority of our adult lives working just tirelessly to insulate ourselves from physical discomfort.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we upgrade our flights for more legroom, we buy thicker mattresses, we use apps to have warm food delivered directly to our couches so we don't even have to step out into the rain.
Guilty as charged.
Right, we all do it. But the source material we are unpacking today flips that entire operating system upside down. We're looking at a deeply personal, meticulously detailed memoir by Magdalena Meller.
Right, and the title is Mamo, daleko, jeszcze.
Exactly, which translates to, Mom, is it much further?
It is such a phenomenal read. We basically follow this family, Magdalena, her husband Miko, and their two teenagers, Antozia and Sebastian. And they live this very high-speed, hyper-connected, Wi-Fi-enabled life in Berlin.
Very typical modern family setup.
Yeah, exactly. And they just decide to swap all of that for a grueling 16-day, 531-kilometer-foot pilgrimage from Jessen to the Jasna Gora Sanctuary in Czestochowa.
Which is just a massive undertaking.
It really is. So the mission for our deep dive today is to explore what the author calls the anthropology of effort. We're going to look at the psychological and, well, the biomechanical reality of intentionally choosing hardship.
Yeah, and how stripping away all those modern layers of convenience might actually be the only way to genuinely meet the people you live with.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the plunge they took, you really have to look at the exact kind of comfort they were running away from.
Right. Magdalena articulates this very specific modern parenting trap. She realizes her family has fallen into this state where they have, deep pockets but an entirely empty soul.
Ouch. But, relatable.
Very. They travel the globe constantly, but she notices this disturbing pattern. She and her husband have essentially morphed into a hybrid travel agency and ATM machine for their kids.
Yeah, the teenagers are just passively consuming these incredible global experiences. They're collecting passport stamps the way you'd collect trading cards.
But they aren't engaging in any kind of shared struggle.
No, not at all. They just show up, complain about the Wi-Fi in the hotel, and wait to be entertained. And Magdalena remembers a walking pilgrimage route she did, 30 years prior in Poland, and realizes returning to it offers a complete systemic reset.
Because on the asphalt, you cannot buy your way out of a blister.
Exactly. It creates this brutal, undeniable level playing field. You are no longer the provider and the consumer. You are just four mammals trying to move forward.
But the choice of route is highly specific and really deliberate. I mean, if a family decides to do a walking pilgrimage today, the default assumption is almost always the Camino de Santiago in Spain.
Right, the Camino is famous.
It has this massive global reputation. The infrastructure is totally built out with beautiful hostels and cafes, and the scenery is just stunning. But Magdalena analyzes the Camino and explicitly rejects it.
Which surprised me at first.
Yeah, she identifies that it has recently devolved into what she terms trendy trekking.
I found her breakdown of the Camino fascinating. She basically says it has become this individualized therapeutic exercise.
Yes, it caters heavily to 50-somethings on solo journeys working through midlife transitions. It is an entirely self-directed experience. On the Camino, you are the absolute master of your schedule. If your knee hurts or you wake up feeling unmotivated, you simply stop at a cafe, order a cappuccino, and decide that 5 kilometers is enough for the day.
Sounds like a vacation.
It operates on the same individualistic principles as the modern world, just in a slightly more rustic setting.
If you give a digital native teenager the option to just quit and sit in a cafe the moment their heels start to bleed,
The trip is over.
yeah, the entire endeavor will collapse by noon on day 2.
Exactly. The Polish pilgrimage structure relies on a completely different psychological mechanism. It is rooted in strict group discipline and raw momentum.
You aren't walking alone.
No, you are walking in a tight column of hundreds of people, heavily populated by other youth groups. The group sets the pace. You are literally carried forward by the kinetic energy and the peer pressure of the crowd. Magdalena knew her kids didn't possess the intrinsic motivation to walk 531 kilometers alone. They needed that external, vibrating rhythm of a massive community to override their desire to stop.
See, I have to push back on the core parenting strategy here just a little. Because dragging teenagers into what is essentially a forced death march feels like an incredibly high-stakes gamble.
It definitely is.
It reminds me of that old-school parenting tactic of throwing a kid into the deep end of a freezing lake to teach them how to swim. Like, sure, they might figure out how to doggy paddle, but you also risk permanently traumatizing them.
That's a fair point.
If these kids break down on day 3 on the side of a highway, they aren't going to have a spiritual awakening. They're just going to resent their parents forever.
What's fascinating here is that the parents were acutely aware of that psychological risk. They didn't just ambush the kids with a forced march. They established a very specific psychological architecture before anyone even laced up a shoe.
Right, the mental contract.
Yes. They created a mental contract that the entire family agreed to. The ultimate goal of reaching Jasnagora was non-negotiable. There was no going back to Berlin.
But within that unyielding framework, they built a crucial pressure release valve.
Exactly.
A safety van, right. But honestly, how does a safety van prevent a full-blown meltdown on the side of a highway when a teenager has just had enough? A kid having a tantrum doesn't care about a mental contract they signed a week ago.
Well, it wasn't just the existence of the van, it was how the parents framed the concept of failure. They preemptively normalized physical defeat.
How do you mean?
They made it clear that taking a ride in the medical van for a few miles wasn't a moral failing or a breach of the contract. It was framed as simple biology.
Oh, I see.
If the cartilage in your knee cannot take another step, you ride the van until the inflammation goes down and then you rejoin the column. And this raises an important question about how we manage discomfort in our daily lives. Because it is in that exact moment of absolute surrender, when the parent's illusion of control completely evaporates in the mud and the smell, that a massive vacuum opens up.
And the people who step into that vacuum are the teenagers.
Yes.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is the pivot that makes the entire deep dive worthwhile. You expect the digital native kids, the ones who are dragged away from their screens, to completely fall apart when the conditions get apocalyptic.
And for the first few days, they act exactly according to the script. They are a broken record of complaints, constantly asking, Mom, is it much further?
Right.
They are consumed by the friction. But as the physical exhaustion deepens, their neurochemistry begins to shift.
The physical exhaustion literally forces them into the present tense. Because their bodies are working so hard, they don't have the scarce cognitive energy to daydream about the Netflix shows they are missing.
Exactly.
But they don't abandon their phones entirely, which is a brilliant detail. They repurpose them.
Right. They open Google Maps, but they are no longer using the screen as an escape hatch to avoid reality. They use it as a tool to engage with the reality right in front of them.
That's a huge shift.
It is. They track the blue dot, calculate the distance to the next village, monitor their pace. The smartphone transforms from a device of passive consumption into an active instrument of navigation and agency.
And they start fully integrating into the raw physical culture of the walk. And this leads to my absolute favorite observation in the entire memoir. As they're walking, the organizers broadcast these deep theological lectures over loudspeakers for the pilgrims to reflect on. And Magdalena asks her daughter what profound spiritual truths she is currently processing. Antosia plainly admits she hasn't listened to a word of the theology. Instead, she is obsessively thinking about how she's going to overhaul her closet when she gets back to Berlin.
She has the sudden realization that she has survived perfectly fine for over a week, using only a handful of items in her backpack.
Right.
She determines that upon returning, she only needs to own 6 shirts.
Most parents would hear that and think, wow, my kid completely missed the spiritual point of this journey to focus on clothes. But Magdalena realizes this is the spiritual point for her daughter.
Yeah.
It all comes back to cognitive load theory.
Exactly the right framework. Every single micro decision you make in a day, including looking at a closet of 40 shirts and deciding which one projects the right image burns cognitive glucose, it creates decision fatigue.
So by deciding to strip her physical possessions down to 6 shirts, Antosia is intuitively hacking her own cognitive load.
Yes.
She is out there sweating on the asphalt, realizing that physical clutter creates mental clutter. Decluttering her physical space is the prerequisite for decluttering her mind. That is her personal anthropology of effort.
The kids fundamentally transition from being consumers to active participants. You see it with Sebastian, the teenage son. He spots a 2 PLN coin in the dirt. which equates to roughly 50 cents.
Practically nothing.
Right. In Berlin, he wouldn't even break his stride for it. On the asphalt, he picks it up and treasures it like a rare artifact. His baseline for dopamine has been completely reset by the physical labor. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, this internal psychological shift wasn't happening in isolation. It was being actively fueled by a radical, almost shocking external environment.
Right, the local hospitality.
The level of community trust and hospitality the family encounters in the Polish villages along the route defies almost every rule of modern self-preservation.
The memoir highlights this massive cultural clash. It points out a traditional German proverb, guest for a day, burden for 10.
Which perfectly encapsulates the modern Western view of hospitality.
Exactly. Having someone in your home is viewed as an imposition. It disrupts your carefully curated routine, it costs money, and it has a very strict expiration date.
The pilgrimage operates on the polar opposite frequency.
The anecdote that truly short-circuited my brain involves the car keys.
Oh, the car keys.
Here that Miko, the father, destroyed his hips by wearing those heavy boots. He finally reaches the absolute limit of his biology and has to leave the march to catch a train back to Berlin. While figuring out how to get to the train station, he strikes up a conversation with a local man.
And this local man had driven his personal car to the town specifically to join the walking column for a few days.
Okay, so you have a stranger who wants to walk but possesses a car, and Miko, who can no longer walk but desperately needs a car to reach the transit hub.
Right.
So what does the stranger do? He simply reaches into his pocket and hands his personal car keys to Miko,
Just like that.
a sweaty guy with a severe limp who he has known for maybe 5 minutes. How does a modern person even compute a stranger handing over their car keys? Defies every risk assessment algorithm we're taught to follow.
You can only really compute it if you understand the alternate economy that the pilgrimage creates.
Tell me more about that.
Well, in our daily lives, we operate on a transactional economy driven by currency and legal liability, but the pilgrimage operates on a symbiotic spiritual economy.
Okay, break down the mechanics of that alternate economy. How does the exchange actually work?
So the pilgrims are doing the brutal physical labor. They are enduring the blisters, the rain, and the exhaustion. But they aren't just walking for themselves. They carry the spiritual intentions, the prayers, and the hopes of the wider community, including the local hosts.
Because the host can't just drop everything to walk.
Exactly. The host cannot take 2 weeks off work to walk to Jasna, so the host provides the physical fuel, the beds, the mushrooms, the car keys, to ensure the pilgrim can keep moving forward.
Wow.
The pilgrim carries the spiritual weight, the host carries the physical cost. It is a perfect, trusting symbiosis.
It totally redefines the concept of wealth. We are conditioned to view wealth as the numbers sitting in an investment portfolio or, the square footage of a house. But on the asphalt, true wealth is human solidarity.
Absolute.
It is the absolute certainty that if your body gives out, a stranger will hand you the keys to their car to ensure you get home safely. That is a level of psychological security that no amount of money can actually buy.
Which brings us to the culmination of the journey. After enduring over 500 kilometers of physical breakdown, sensory overload, and radical trust, the sheer magnetic pull of their destination takes over the psychology of the group.
The visual description of the final approach to Częstochowa is incredibly cinematic. Because of the rolling topography of the landscape, the towering spire of the Jasna sanctuary is constantly playing hide-and-seek with the walkers.
Anticipation is huge here.
They crest a hill, the tower pierces the horizon, and a surge of adrenaline hits the column. Then the road dips, the tower vanishes behind a tree line, and their patience is tested for another hour.
The emotional climax upon finally breaching the sanctuary grounds is profound. You have hundreds of people completely caked in the dust and sweat of a 16-day march, entering this sacred space and physically collapsing.
Literally collapsing.
The text describes them lying completely prostrate on the stone floor before the image of the Black Madonna. It is the ultimate manifestation of the surrender they first learned in the rainstorm with the manure. They have nothing left to give physically, and they yield completely.
And in a beautiful full-circle moment, Miko, who has recovered from his hip injury, drives all the way back from Berlin just to meet his family at a KFC right outside the sanctuary limits.
Which is such a great detail.
It is. He ensures that despite his early exit, the family unit crosses that final metaphorical finish line together.
But the transition back to their modern reality is jarring. Magdalena describes standing in her own bathroom in Berlin.
Amazing.
It feels euphoric for a moment. But almost instantly, the sprawling luxury of their house feels strangely hollow. The endless conveniences they used to obsess over suddenly seem entirely unnecessary.
So what does this all mean? The ultimate proof of the experiment's success is found in the teenagers. Before the walk, returning from a vacation meant the kids would immediately sprint to their separate bedrooms, fire up their devices, and disappear into the digital ether.
Which is what most teens would do.
Right. But after 531 kilometers of shared struggle, they don't do that. They shower, and then they voluntarily go into the living room and just sit in quiet solidarity with their parents. The digital noise has completely lost its grip.
The core thesis Magdalena leaves the reader with is a total redefinition of the family unit. A family is not merely a collection of individuals who happen to share a mailing address, a grocery budget, and a Wi-Fi router.
No.
A true family is a shared journey.
You only forge that bond by stepping out of the resort, abandoning the cabana, and agreeing to carry a heavy burden together. The brutal friction of the asphalt systematically burned away the consumerism, the ego, and the distractions, leaving them with the only resource that actually mattered, each other.
Because true growth only happens when we step out of our predictable, highly optimized routines. Without the resistance of the road, the muscles of their relationships would have continued to atrophy in the comfort of Berlin.
We are currently racing toward a future defined by absolute, frictionless convenience. We are building AI to order our groceries, algorithms to perfectly curate our entertainment, and autonomous vehicles to drive us so we never even have to look at the road.
All to avoid discomfort.
Exactly. But consider this. If shared physical struggle, the actual friction of navigating a difficult, inconvenient world together, is the primary mechanism for deep human connection, what happens when we successfully engineer all the friction out of our lives?
That is the big question.
So in your own highly optimized, deeply comfortable life, you probably don't need to walk 500 kilometers across Poland. But what is your version of the asphalt? Where can you intentionally introduce a shared struggle, a mutual inconvenience to strip away the digital noise? Because if you want to truly meet the people you live with, you might have to find your own version of the road.